Anyway, let us begin our program this evening. And I want to say that I am rightly very much humbled. Excuse me. I'm very much humbled and very appreciative because as I look through the audience here, I see many of you that have taught me so much about Scioto County area prehistory and archaeology over the many decades now. And I'm profoundly thankful to all of you for that. And basically what I'm just doing here is standing up, giving a program on the things that you folks have taught me. So it's truly your work that made the program this evening, and just thank you so much for that. Anyway, speaking of acknowledging, in this case, sadly, late friends, many of us recognize Vernon Teague. Here he is at the upstairs at the Wirtz collection. Vernon, besides being just a dedicated collector, a wonderful friend, taught so many of us so much, he also did, just wonderful service here over the years at the Southern Ohio Museum and Cultural Center. And tragically, Vernon died about 1.5 years ago, but all of us certainly owe a great amount to Vernon and miss him sorely. Okay, for those people that might be watching on YouTube that are not Ohioans, or perhaps not even from the eastern United States, this shows the location of us here in Scioto County, Ohio, south of the Great Lakes, along the Ohio River that flows into the Mississippi River, the location of Scioto County, Ohio. And here is a close-up of, as we can see, an aerial view of Scioto County with some of the main towns marked. And you can see the from Wakefield through Lucasville to Portsmouth, the broad valley of the Scioto River. But from Stockdale through Mintford to Wheelersburg, you can see the pre-glacial Taze River Valley, which existed before the glaciers. The Taze River no longer exists, but the northern end of the Taze River Valley flows northward through Beaver Creek into the Scioto River near Piketon. But the southern part of the Taze in Ohio, north of the Ohio River, carries the Little Scioto River, which enters the Ohio River at Wheelersburg. And both of them are, very small streams that just flow through the this great big broad ancient river valley. And again, I want to mention that because tonight's program is going to focus on the prehistoric, the ancient archaeology of the greater Scioto County area here. However, I would like to emphasize that archaeology includes everything up to practically the present day. Again, I bet nobody wants to be here till midnight. I know I don't. I know no one does, especially to hear me talking that long. But so tonight, for time's sake, we're going to talk about the ancient peoples before the 1600s. However, I and many of us here, I know because you've taught me about such things, are just as interested in the peoples of Scioto County through the 1800s and the 1900s. And so like, studying archaeology, let's say Rarden, Mintford, the small settlement of Larry out west of South Webster, South Furnace, the steel mills of New Boston, uh, the mills, the furnaces, those are just much a part of archaeology. And although we're not going to get into that this evening for the sake of time, I know, and many of us are just as interested in, the people that might have lived up Hunting Run Hollow in the 1930s or 40s or 50s as we are in the ancient mound builders or the people of the Ice Age. It's all archaeology. So archaeology is way, 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 way more than Native American ancient artifacts. It's also things, from 50, 100 years ago. And in terms of what the areas that we know the most about Scioto County right now, we have lots of artifact samples from along the Ohio River at the bottom of the image here. We also have a lot of stuff along the Scioto from Wakefield through Lucasville to Portsmouth. We also have a good sample from around Otway. And many of you might have known the late Poodle Newman. His given name was Lloyd, but Poodle, a resident of Rarden, set up every year at the Rarden Whitetail Deer Festival. And I would also set up with Poodle. And during those years, Poodle's gone now, but during those years, he taught me much about the prehistoric peoples, what he had found around the Rarden area. So thanks to Poodle, Rarden is really well known. And then just kind of south of South Webster by Edmund Switch out there back in the 1980s, excavated a rock shelter along with Denny Kleiman and Pat Riley, and we learned a good bit about that area right there. But in general, a lot of the the hollows, the smaller streams, the hills, and even the great big Taze Valley through the eastern part of Scioto County are very poorly known archaeologically, simply because we haven't met people that have the artifact samples from there yet. So we look forward to studying those areas with all of your help in the future. So that's a big opportunity right there. Anyway, time to move on. Here is what we call a Clovis point, named after Clovis, New Mexico, where they were first described. These things are found over most of North America. They're from about 11,000 years BC, and these are the latest widely recognized type of knife or spear point that we find in this area, about 13,000 years old. Some of those have been found scattered around Scioto County. In fact, just west of Scioto County at help me somebody. I can't think when everybody looks at me. At Sandy Springs, but at least it keeps me humble when I can't remember. At Sandy Springs, just over the Adams County line, there's been hundreds of these found. Sandy Springs on the Scioto River, just into Adams County, is one of the largest Paleo-Indian Clovis sites in North America, actually. A very big deal. And again, I'm not going to get into Clovis in Scioto County much, because in Emily's book that is coming out very shortly, she addresses that. So I'll leave that for you to look at when you get Emily's book. Anyway, this, mercifully enough for all of you, this is the only distribution map we'll be looking at tonight. But it's just to show the kind of things that we try to do with when we look at folks' artifacts and we see what they found, where they found it. We try and construct maps like this. In fact, this happens to be the Clovis points that have been reported from Ohio. But we do this, for any type of artifact. So we have, although this is the only one we'll look at this evening, we have, just many of these maps for different artifact types. And we try to get, a nice high resolution digital image, which these days means just take a picture of it with your cell phone and the location, the raw material, and then that's suitable for the computer-based geographic information system analyses, which can really tease out some things we might not be able to see otherwise. Now, of course, this is the state level map, but we have the the much more finely detailed topographic maps that show exactly where all these things have been found. But those things, to respect people's privacy, we don't make available to the general public, because that would be a bad thing to show all of people's favorite fields to the public, and we'd never do that. Okay, here, in fact, also another thing that never do unless people especially request it to protect people's privacy, we don't say, oh, this is so-and-so's artifact. Oh, that's so-and-so's artifact. Unless the people want that known, we keep it private, because, we realize it is a big privilege to be invited to someone's home to see their treasures, and we never say, oh, you should see what so-and-so has at their house or something. That would be totally wrong and a terrible thing to do. So that's why we just don't put people's names with the things unless they specifically request it, so that they have their privacy and security. Anyway, here is a point that could even be older than Clovis. Who knows? Because this area, of course, was not covered by the glaciers. It was found at the west edge of the Taze River Valley, north of Wheelersburg. And, we know that there were people here before Clovis where there was no glacier, so it behooves us to look for those things. So this might be of that age. It could be something more recent. We just don't know. But when we don't know, that's another opportunity to learn. And again, as many of us know, but I'll emphasize it, the names that archaeologists give to these points, types, artifact styles, are purely arbitrary, and they shouldn't be taken for more than they're worth. In fact, this point looks to be from about 9,500 years BC, a classic late Paleo-Indian point. It also is from the same site north of Wheelersburg at the west edge of the Taze River Valley. And but you see, these are often called by convention high-low points. But the reason that they're called high-low points, they were first described at the High-Low Gun Club in Michigan. And I didn't realize this because I always forget the difference between trap shooting and skeet shooting. But they get into one or the other at the High-Low Gun Club there. And I hadn't realized, but when they launch the clay pigeons, there's like a high tower and a low tower or something, and they call it the High-Low Gun Club after that, and that's why the names of these points. So again, all totally arbitrary. Don't take it for more than they're worth, and again, just arbitrary names, yes. Okay. There's a whole bunch of names for these, but this is one of the older type of points in the Scioto County area, called, strangely enough, early side notched, because they date about 10,000 years ago, and as you can see, the notches come in from the side. And this one is what they call the E-notch variety. Can you almost see like a backwards frontwards E on those notches at least a little bit. Sometimes you have to use your imagination, but those are often called the E notch variety. But you can see it's been sharpened down to almost nothing, because just like today, if you find a pencil that's been thrown away, it's probably going to be sharpened down to the eraser. And the knives and spear points that we find are going to pretty much be sharpened down, to the handle and then thrown away. So this is totally worn out and exhausted. But a good old point from about 10,000 years ago, that from the Tays here. Moving to the Turkey Creek bottom along the Ohio River, just out by Friendship, east of the mouth of the Scioto River, we have these about 9,000-year-old LaCroix points. And I should have mentioned at the beginning that in Scioto County, Ohio here, a lot of the points are made out of flint, some of them out of Bisher and there, we'll edit that out. A Bisher in Brassfield flint from the greater Ohio Brush Creek area of Adams County. And then south of the Ohio into Kentucky, into Carter County, Kentucky, we have the Paoli flint. That's very beautiful, very abundant. And this point is made out of that, a Paoli flint from Carter County, Kentucky. Then a lot of points are made out of the Upper Mercer, the Vanport, the Lower Mercer flints from the Jackson County area. But right here in Scioto County, most of the flint that you'll find will be from the cobbles in the rivers and streams. What they call a heavy-duty serrated point, because they're thick and they often have serrations or saw teeth on them, about 8,000 years old. This one is also out of the Paoli flint from Carter County, Kentucky, and it's also from the edge of the Tays, just north of Wheelersburg. And again, you can see how it probably used to be much more broad, but has been really sharpened down to just a very narrow blade yet. And I should mention, at this time, we're still before they grew crops. We're still before they had pottery. We're at the times when they had the spears, often launched with a spear thrower, or atlatl as they're called sometime, but no bow and arrow yet, no crops yet, no pottery yet. But there's more than flint points. Here's a nice full grooved axe, again from the Turkey Creek bottom on the Ohio, just east of Portsmouth here. And again, you can see it's an axe used for presumably woodworking, butchering, splitting wood, a whole host of things like that. And but a lot of people, say, but with that little dinky blade, what could you really chop down? And the answer is not much, because the blade has been sharpened down so much that only a stub of it is left, and it was time to make a new axe. These axes are about 5,500 years BC to about 3,000 years BC or so, and are abundant in Scioto County. In fact, these axes have only been radiocarbon dated 3 places in Ohio. One at the Scioto County Infirmary site just west of town. The other at the rock shelter out by Edmund Switch, northeast of town. And the third one has been on the rock shelter at Bob Evans Farms outside of Rio Grande in Gallia County. So all the only 3 that have been carbon dated have been from either Scioto County or very close to Scioto County. Then, speaking of Poodle Newman, recorded this from Poodle years ago. One of my favorite artifacts that Poodle had, he always loved to really display this at the White-tailed Deer Festival. A really nice 3/4 grooved axe, again about 5,000 years old or so. But you can, it's an ancient damage where they hit the tree wrong, they hit the bone of the animal they were butchering wrong, and you can see a big part of the bit spalled away, and the axe was finished. If any of you have been to the White-tailed Deer Festival, the area just north of town where they'd often park in that field, that's exactly where Poodle found that axe. And just as an aside, they'd always have Poodle and me set up right next to the man that had the copperheads and the rattlesnakes, and be sitting there and could always hear. But what kind of frightened me was the sound of the rattlesnake rattling. I can't tell from a cicada. I mean, I can't, that same whirring. So I thought, whoa, if it's cicada season and I'm out and about, I will not be able to notice the rattlesnake there. And oh my golly! But then when the tent really drew the crowd was when he was feeding them the mice. People would really come to watch that. But anyway, happy days at the White-tailed Deer Festival. Hope to be back there again, but Poodle will be and is sorely missed. Okay, these are sometimes called Matanzas points, named after Matanzas, Illinois. Sometimes called fish spear points, because if you put this on its side, you can imagine it looks like little fish swimming. But a lot of people think they're called fish spears because they're used to spear fish, but no, because they're thought to look like a fish. This is also from the edge of the Taze Valley just north of Wheelersburg. And again, this has been just whittled down to just a stub of itself. About, these things are about 5,000 to 7,000 years old or so. But no pottery, bow and arrow, or agriculture yet, but we're getting there. And the Rarden point, this is from the Turkey Creek bottom, just west of town on the Ohio, about 5,000 years old or so. And the point of all this is there's a whole big variety of ancient point types to study in this area. All of them have different distributions throughout the landscape. Some are found more in the river valleys, others are found more at the heads of the hollows, so on and so forth. They're made out of different raw materials. We can tell from the ones that were broken in production, they were manufactured in different areas around here, and that's the kind of thing that we really love to study about all of these different point types that can tell us so much. Not the place to get into it here, but just the kind of things that we can study and learn. Here's what I consider one of the most beautiful points from Scioto County. It was found at the mouth of Bear Creek into the Scioto River, just close to the northern edge of Scioto County here, and made out of Vanport flint, in this case probably from Flint Ridge. Superficially, it looks like some of the agate basin points that are 11,000 years old from west of here, but when you examine it carefully, the flaking patterns are different. There's no grinding in its of a style that was about 4,000 to 5,000 years old. But again, from the mouth of Bear Creek, in just one of the most exquisite points, I think, from Scioto County. Okay, we're almost to the time of pottery and agriculture now, but in so many of these heavy stem points are very, 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 very common in this area, about 2,500 to about 5,000 years old. And one of the more abundant types of points around here. As you can see, they're quite thick and quite roughly chipped, usually. But here we are. Sunflower. The advent, about 1,500 years BC, the advent of the Eastern Agricultural Complex, which did not include corn, did not include beans, but at this time, about 3,500 years ago, they started growing sunflowers, started growing squash, the amaranth, the chenopodium or goosefoot, the knotweed. They even harvested the ragweed, and it was a quite a big deal. This was also the time that pottery vessels became common in this area, and in fact, the earliest pottery that I know of, right from Scioto County here, was from the rock shelter that Denny Kleinman and Pat Riley dug in 1987 out by in northeastern Scioto County, out by Edmund Switch. Very thick pottery, almost an inch thick. But something important to mention here, pottery was a big deal for a reason you might not expect. Before the time of pottery, by examining human remains, we see that almost nobody lived past 30 or 35 years old. That was the maximum lifespan. And the reason being, by the time people were about 25 years old, their teeth were worn down to the gums, because at that time they would have to heat up. They'd have like a skin bag or a bag made from, let's say, the bladder of an elk or a bison or something. They would have to put hot rocks in there to get the food hot to boil, and little pieces of the stone would come off. And so it'd be like chewing on sandpaper. And their teeth were down to the gums by the time they were 25. Not just here, but throughout the eastern United States. And after that, I mean, sure, you can always, eat gruel or soup or something, but it opened up the road to all kinds of infections and things, and it basically was the end of their life. Once they started using pottery, they could often put the vessel right on the fire, so they had far less grit in their food, and a lot of the folks then were living to about, the age of 50 or so. Which, I say is, quite young myself now, but 50 is about the average age for any, non-modern industrial society, any place in the world. Although a few people would live older, that's about the usual life expectancy for agricultural peoples anywhere in the world where they don't have modern medicine and things. So the pottery was a big deal to extend their lifespan. Then we hear so much about the Hopewell culture, and rightly so. However, our friends in Kentucky have defined what they call the Cogswell culture. After, just like the Hopewell culture named after the Hopewell family, Cogswell culture named after the Cogswell family that owned the site where they identified it. And it was about 1500 BC to about 800 BC. And they were just getting into making pottery. They used the Eastern Agricultural Complex. And so it was a time of big change. And even though artifacts of the later that we can identify from the later Hopewell culture, even though we're at the Portsmouth Earthworks here, are scarce in this area. They're uncommon. These things from Cogwell time are just about coming out the ears. I mean, they're found by the hundreds, if not the thousands. So the whole Scioto County area here, I mean, was just apparently massively populated in Cogswell times. So a whole big bunch was happening around here that we really, want to study more. And here another nice Paoli, Carter County, Kentucky point of the Cogswell culture. Again, look, very little sticking out of the handle when they threw that one away. It was resharpened down to nothing. And again, from the Turkey Creek bottom just west of town. And one more of the Cogswell culture there. Quite distinctive, but these are just found in great big abundance around here. A lot happening around here about 3,000 years ago. Apparently quite a huge population. I mean, for the time, because when I say huge population, if we keep estimating on the high end, like each village was occupied by, guessing, a high number of people, if we assume they were all occupied at the same time, which they were clearly not, even at about the year 1600, which would have been about the maximum population with agricultural villages, we just can't get any more estimate than maybe 20,000 people for all of Ohio. I mean, 20,000 people in one spot is a lot. However, a town of 20,000, it's kind of, I'm a rural boy. A town of 20,000 seems like a big town to me. But as the world goes, a town of 20,000 is small. And when you spread out a town of 20,000 all over Ohio, you have a very sparse population. So when we say big population, we mean relative for the times. Okay, and the good old Adena culture starting to build the conical burial mounds around here about 2,500 years ago or so. Again, Emily will address that extensively in her book, so we're not really going to get into it in this particular program. But this is a good old Adena stem point, again from the Turkey Creek bottom of the Ohio, just west of Portsmouth. But as you can see, it truly has been resharpened down to nothing. There's almost nothing left but the stem. It's totally used up. And again, by studying the resharpening states of all of these points and knives that we find around that are found in different areas, we can learn a whole lot about the way folks were living by studying that as well. Another opportunity. Moving right along, a late Adena Robbins point. This one is from the Tays just north of Wheelersburg. But again, you can see it's almost nothing above the stem is left, resharpened down to nothing. Then, toward the Hopewell, yes, wonderful Snyder's or Hopewell Point. This one was found along the Ohio River behind the 100-mile house that many of us are familiar with, along the Ohio and the western, near the western end of Scioto County. It's made out of Vanport flint, in this case probably I guess that's what they call a blooper, we have to edit out, probably quarried at Flint Ridge, south of Newark. But these things aren't all that common in Scioto County area, which is a mystery. Again, if the Portsmouth earthworks are Hopewell in age, there's just not that many Hopewell artifacts that we recognize as Hopewell, I should say, really around. So that's another opportunity to really study in detail. And again, the Great Tremper Mound, where 73 comes out onto 104 here on the Scioto River just north of town. Put another way, it's at the mouth of Pond Run into the Scioto River. But it's very early Hopewell, and maybe about the year 1 or so, and it had maybe 300, the remains of 300 people that were cremated that were recovered from it, but there seemed to be very few known Ohio Hopewell graves ever identified in this area besides those early ones. Another mystery, especially being at the Portsmouth Earthworks here. Okay, click. Now, this is what we call the Jack's Reef Point again. This is again from the Turkey Creek bottom, made out of the paoli flint from Kentucky. These are also called intrusive mound because sometimes these people would bury their dead into the older mounds. In fact, several of the mounds right here in Portsmouth from the Edina period had these later graves intruded into it with some very spectacular artifacts, some of which are indeed in the Wirtz collection here. But right now, after the year 1000, big change as we approach the end of the program here. And as you can see by the sign, the change is corn and the bow and arrow. This is a major benefactor of mine and a good friend and a mentor, Alvy McGraw, pointing at the ground there. That's Clarence Blaine with a cigar in his mouth. They're at the Blaine Fort Ancient Period Village site at the east end of Chillicothe. Right now, this is under the 23 overpass over Eastern Avenue. But anyway, appropriately enough, there they are in a cornfield. So about the year 1100, corn farming came to this area. The bow and arrow came to this area. And as an aside, although he spent much of his life in Chillicothe, Alvy was a New Boston man. When he was 13, he started working in the steel mills here, but then he became a ridge runner during Prohibition and was quite successful at it, except toward the end he had some trouble and was caught and ended up in the federal prison in Atlanta for a while. But and I say this with all respect because Alvy was a really good friend and benefactor and mentor and role model. But as many of us remember, Al Capone got in big trouble by income tax evasion. Alvy had the presence of mind. He paid income tax on everything he made delivering the alcohol during Prohibition. And when he got out of prison, they tried to, I should say when he went into prison, they tried to seize the money, but the judge ruled he had paid taxes on it. So it was officially his, and that's how he was able to buy 3 square miles of ground at Chillicothe. And again, I say this with all, love, respect, and affection. Again, truly a role model and a major benefactor. But a very interesting life and a New Boston man, yes. And also a humongous patron of Ohio archaeology. And he benefited many of us in this room in major ways, yes. Anyway, to the end, we're winding things up now. The Fort Village site that many of us are familiar with along the Scioto River at Rosemont, just north of Portsmouth here. A few years ago, Jared Burks ran his wonderful magnetometer over it and found all kinds of magnetic anomalies that we won't go into right now. But there at the very top of the image, you can see like some of the house structures, the pit houses, the wall trench house, some of the fire basins that David Kuhn and myself excavated in the early 2000s. But more than dwell on the Forts Village site, the Scioto County area itself is blessed by many wonderful Fort Ancient Period village sites from about the year 1200 to about the year 1600. Many of you saw Mr. Valentine's, wonderful display of such out in the entryway before the PowerPoint this evening. And a big, thank you to Steve for bringing a part of his spectacular and very important collection. Anyways, what we can learn from this. Here is the sequence of arrow point styles. You can see how they kind of change through time a little bit from 1200 to 1400, from the bottom to the top. Some of them have the saw teeth, the serrations on them, but that only seems to have lasted kind of a passing style that only lasted maybe for a couple generations. But now we finally get away from just the flint artifacts and stone artifacts and some other things. Here is some of the Fort Ancient pottery from the Fort Village site, about 700 years old. You can see it's all tempered with ground up a clamshell, and you can see the lug handle that's common on many of them. And here we have the loop handle that's common on many of the pottery vessels from the Fort Ancient Village sites around here. And lastly, some of the incised decoration on some of the Fort Village site and other Fort Ancient period pottery vessels that we find around here. And again, so there's tremendous opportunity for folks to study all these different pottery motifs, and of course, also the functions of these different pottery, and the difference between the shell tempering, the grit tempering, the limestone tempering, the chert tempering, vessel form, and I mean there's much study that people can do on the pottery vessels here, certainly. And on one of my favorite things, the animal bones. Much has been learned, but much more to study on animal bones from the Fort Ancient Village sites around here. This is from the fort site at Rosemont. You can see it's a young adult elk. You can see the teeth there. It's the cheek or the upper jaw. But one of my favorites here, also from the fort site, about 700 years old, there is you can see the upper jaw of the of an old deer. And this deer must have been 9 or 10 years old. I mean, look how the teeth are worn to the gum, and look how some of them were even, going to be falling out. I mean, so if they hadn't eaten this deer, it couldn't have lived, more than a few months anyway. But one thing that shows us is deer of that age are practically unknown in Ohio now. Very few deer in Ohio get past 5 years, and most deer harvested during the gun and the bow season now are about 1.5 years old. I mean, few make it to 3 or 4, but still, as we know, that is, tightly regulated by the Division of Wildlife, and it's a sustainable harvest. As we know, deer are increasing in population even at that level of harvest. So we can see now in the Fort Ancient times around here, 700 years ago, they were taking far, far less deer. The hunting pressure was far less than it is today. So they weren't anywhere near to depleting the deer herds at any time in ancient Ohio, not even near to it. And smaller things. The rice rat. For some reason, not just here in Scioto County, but in much of southern Ohio and northern Kentucky, in these things, the bones are disarticulated, cut, and often burned. They were butchering and apparently eating these. And, well, you can see the dime for scale. They were, maybe the size of a chipmunk or something. But even though they're called rats, they're not the kind of rats like that would infest your grain or something. They're rats. They're way more closely related to the muskrats. And the reason they call them rice rats, they don't go after the rice kernels. They'll decimate a rice field. As soon as the rice seedlings come up, they'll eat the blades that are coming up. But these things are also, and they're somewhat territorial. So they wouldn't have been living in their villages. They wouldn't have been killing them as pests, in their villages, because there wouldn't be a rice rat living in a Native American village any more than there'd be a muskrat living in the village. But they might have had to eliminate these because they're eating their corn blades as soon as they came up. That's quite possible. But you'd think that either they, maybe had the kids go after these, or they had some way of trap them. Because, you're not going to go out with your bow and arrow and be, hunting these things anymore. It just wouldn't be practical. But so many of these rice rats, and the interesting thing is today, the rice rat range is no more north than southern Kentucky. So it's thought that maybe the climate might have been just a bit more mild at that time. And almost finished now. At the Fort Village site again, by Rosemont, there we work closely with the people at the biology department at the Ohio State University, and we identified 20 different species of clamshells. Many of them either extinct from Ohio, or either extinct or on the endangered species list, because in the Scioto River, there's been like a 95% change in the species composition, we've learned, of the freshwater clams from before modern times till today. Most of these kinds here are very intolerant of muddy water. The kinds that we have today are tolerant of muddy water. It's, so almost a complete change. So our agricultural practices have totally changed the composition we've learned of clams in the Scioto River. So there's all kinds of work to be done on the clam, samples too, whoever might wish to. Then, lastly, we come to the fish. This is a freshwater drum. These things eat small clams, and their teeth look. This is the tooth plate. The teeth are pretty much gone. The teeth look like little pearls or little beads set in those jaws. But we found something like Dr. Cavender at Ohio State University identified 25 species of fish from the village site at Rosemont, and he also said it was the best preserved fish collection in Ohio he's ever seen. And I think the second to last picture here, kind of a mystery now. Well, I mean, we're all familiar, with the big old catfish from the river, from the Scioto and from the Ohio River. And those were common. However, do you see the tiny little catfish jaws above that dime? For some reason, and there were hundreds of those throughout the deposit, for some reason, the Indians at the village site at Rosemont 700 years ago were harvesting huge numbers of those catfish when they were only about the size of a tadpole. And I think many of us that have been out and about, streams and creeks much of our lives, see shortly after they hatch, you see the little catfish kind of form these little almost like balls where they're like all swimming around each other. And if you had a dip net, you could dip into that ball and probably get 50 or 100 real quick. It would also, if you did it too much, quickly eliminate your population of them. Because, of course, those are the ones that grew up to be big catfish. But then again, there were only a few people in their big rivers. But why were they doing these little, harvesting so many of those little catfish? Truly a mystery to be worked on. And they didn't. I was taught, since we only have a microphone on me, I repeat everything that's said, and well put. The comment was they didn't have any sardines, and that's right. Maybe they just plain liked them. Maybe they just liked them. But what amazes me is, even though so small, they still had them little, barbed stingers on them. So you'd have to be careful of those. But, maybe they just knew how to do that. But for some reason, they were harvesting huge numbers of these tiny, tiny, tiny catfish. And this is the slide we've all been waiting for, the last one. Anyway, and here's a real nice Adena period 2,000-year-old point from the Turkey Creek bottom with it. But anyway, I just want to emphasize, there's way, there's ways for everyone that has the slightest inclination to participate in local archaeological research. If we're interested in the Ice Age, the early hunters, the mound builders, the later corn farmers, if you're interested in stone artifacts, flint artifacts, if you're interested in pottery, if you're interested in early life in the streams, if you're interested in deer populations, elk populations, if you want to study raccoon growth patterns 700 years ago, or if you want to study the steel mills, if you want to study Rarden, if you want to study people up One Hollow, if you want to study urban people in Portsmouth, if you want to study the growth of the shoe factories, the ice house, there's so many opportunities. And there's our information, and and also in the back, and just let us know how anyone might want to participate, and we'll get you all set up on your very own project. And there are indeed on the very back some of the flyers on these various things, and I'll leave off by saying, remember, summer solstice, Friends of Serpent Mound, Soaring Eagle Retreat Center, 1 week from this weekend.
Yep. Free to the public.
And thank you.
Jeb is going to speak.
But come anyway. But it'll be a total different program at the Wilson's request on pottery of this area. But thank you so much, Heidi.